Welcome back to another This Week in Bevy. This week in the Bevy ecosystem, we see Tiny Glade ship a Steam demo, a live VJ set powered by Bevy, screen space reflections in the deferred renderer, and more. We've also got the usual showcases and a couple really interesting crate releases for 2D lighting systems and GPU particles. Tiny Glade's demo is out this week with the ability to build small castles, and yes, you can pet the sheep. Tiny Glade uses Bevy's ECS and their own custom renderer, which they talk about a bit in the 80 level article linked on the site. I of course had to download this one to give it a try, and it is just as cozy as it looks. And are you one of the people wondering what Bevy is planning before declaring a 1.0 release? Alice gave her thoughts over on Reddit, including the need for an editor, documentation, and more. This is of course not an official Bevy 1.0 roadmap, rather it's just Alice's thoughts, but it's still useful to know what prominent Bevy developers think about what would be needed for a 1.0. In an interesting application of Bevy, DrLuke performed a Bevy-based VJ set at a hacker conference in Germany. It was about 2 months of work to build up the 2-hour set, and you can see a variety of images, as well as the video we just watched, in the Discord thread, showing debug UI, live performance, as well as a nice screenshot of what the user interface looks like. Moving into some project news, I've been working with isometric projection a lot lately, so it's great to see this Rhombus get a primitive implementation, which could simplify the handling of isometric projections in the future. A new gray trait for color spaces that allows the simpler implementation of a series of grays was introduced this week. Rather than needing to specify the full set of values, such as RGB, each trait implementation is defined with a pure black and a pure white. The gray function then accepts a lightness value to generate a mix of these two values. 0 is black, and 1 is white. And a new random sampling example was introduced to show off the new shape sample functionality, which we've talked about in previous issues. This example shows off sampling interiors and boundaries of a cube, while the second sampling example, sampling primitives, was also merged this week, showing off the rest of the shapes, in a nice Firefly color scheme. We've got another interesting rendering PR this week in Screen Space Reflections, or SSR, for the deferred renderer. Deferred rendering was introduced in Bevy 0.12 as an alternative to Bevy's existing rendering style. This PR implements SSR, or Screen Space Reflections. This technique approximates real-time reflections based on ray marching through the depth buffer and copying samples from the final rendered frame. And using the gLTF loader can be a bit confusing with all of the elements in gLTF files. Loading specific scenes, nodes, meshes, and more has gained more documentation in 13.548. And the transform component is a useful struct inside and outside of Bevy contexts. With 13.533 and 13.599, Bevy transform became more modular and usable as a standalone dependency, with minimal dependencies of its own. And with that, we've made it to the showcase. This game is from a game jam in April. And while I could play it on itch for you, I'm going to show you this GIF instead so that I can actually talk about it. Once the game jam in April finished, this game had additional work put into it over the month of May. It's available to play and download on itch.io and involves smashing a bunch of bugs and doing chores if you can get to them. This output is generated from a Raytracing program with the hopes of developing it further into a CAD program. The code for this one is available on GitHub. The link is on the website as usual. Our next showcase is called IceWarfare, which is an attempt at recreating a War 3 feet map, a War 3FT map, where mages trying to fight each other by bashing into each other. The current work is demonstrating the character controller, quote, on ice. After spending a few hours with Bevy a few weeks ago, this person continued to build out sprite animations, camera operation, displaying a diamond grid with proper texturing, and even their first shader. Debugging Bevy apps and schedules can be a little bit confusing without a visual aid, so this is a mermaid flowchart visualizer for Bevy systems based on the Bevy mod debug dump crate. This showcase added controller support and applied the isometric projection to keyboard and controller input, as well as raycasting. The Blender script to support rendering all 32 angles of animation and 5 animations has grown to automatically select NLA tracks and produce JSON metadata that can be imported into Bevy. The showcase thread in the Discord includes the Blender script used to render out the sprite sheet for this character. Cat Chaser is a Ludum Dare jam entry from back in 2017 that gains new life with a web release on itch.io after being ported to Bevy. In it, you run around as a dog and chase the cat. If you can get the cat into the square, you win the level. Again, this is playable on itch.io, which may be obvious since that's what I'm showing you here. Bevy VR Blocks includes physics and more on a Quest 2 in virtual reality. The source for this one is also available on GitHub, and the link is on the website. And we've got some more work on Bevypunk. This is a first attempt at a character creator using Bevy Linux for the Bevypunk example. It is scenario 5 described in the 10 challenges for Bevy UI frameworks GitHub discussion. This GitHub discussion was created sometime in December, and while it is not any official benchmarking tool, it is a proposal that includes a number of challenges for UI toolkits. Number 5 is the character editor that we just saw. In Scriptgrip, the player controls a rocket by constructing a list of commands, which you can see on the right here, and then playing them over time. The aim is to finish the level as fast as possible, and there's a global leaderboard where players can compete with each other. My little rocket ship is unfortunately not going to hit that leaderboard though. And finally, for the showcases, there's progress on this wireframe renderer project. The larger timeline of progress is accounted for on Mastodon, going from original intent, reading a paper, all the way through to wireframes actually working, and even dashed lines. Bevy Ratatouille 0.4 is out, and even though we've talked about Bevy Ratatouille in the past, this is the restart of the Bevy plugin for building TUIs, TUIs, or Terminal User Interfaces, with Ratatouille. The 0.4 release is a completely new crate as the name has been transferred, and the old crate has been deprecated. The current release is still in the experimental phase and looking for feedback. Next up, we've got Bevy Hanabi, which is a GPU particle system plugin for the Bevy game engine. The most notable new feature in Bevy Hanabi 0.11 is support for new trails and ribbons. Ribbons, if you're unfamiliar, look a little bit like this, and there's also a migration guide and a changelog. BevyMod Sequencer got its first release. BevyMod Sequencer is an action sequence graph plugin for turn-based games. The crate provides a sequencer component that aids in queuing systems or animations to be able to specify their ordering. And finally, we've got Bevy Light 2D. Bevy Light 2D is a general-purpose 2D lighting plugin for Bevy that prioritizes ease of use and general application over depth of features. It takes inspiration from a number of 2D lighting crates that came before it, and it looks a little bit like this. Using it is as simple as adding the Light 2D plugin and dropping in a point light. And that's it for this week. As always, we've got all of the pull requests that were merged if you want to go over the full list, as well as any pull requests that were opened and issues that were opened this week. If you want to get involved in the Bevy project, doing some PR review is a great place to start. And that's it for me for this week. I'll see you next week for This Week in Bevy.